Listen, I know what you're going to say. Ooh, the Tour de France already has a point system. This whole video is entirely redundant. Wrong. You're wrong. There's three main reasons that you're wrong. First of all, the Tour de France point system is very heavily weighted towards the sprinters, with there being nearly 3 times as many points available on flat stages as there are in mountains and time trials. Secondly, the Tour de France point system doesn't have a team standing like the Formula One constructor standing. So using the F1 point system, we can have a whole another leaderboard. And who doesn't love having an extra leaderboard? I know that I do. And thirdly, if you don't finish the Tour de France, whether that's through crashing or finishing outside of the time limit, in the Tour de France, you're just fucking kicked out the race, no points, nothing. Whereas in F1, all the points that you've scored up until that point are still counted. So everyone that does well is still included in the leaderboard, not just the people that finish the race. So pipe down, subscribe to the channel, and stop trying to be such a smartass.
The first stage was a time trial, which was won by Ushov, giving him the early lead in the Riders' Championship, and this also gave his team Credit Agricole the lead in the team standings, closely followed by the three teams who each had two different points finishes on the first stage. Jimmy Casper managed to win stage 2 with Ushov and Stuart O'Grady, the only two riders to score back-to-back points in the first two stages, and the 2 points that Ushov picked up for his 9th place finish were enough to keep him in the lead of the Riders' Championship, but it was not enough to keep the lead in the team standings, with CSC taking the top spot. Robbie McEwen improved on his second place from the day before and managed to win the third stage, which also put him in the lead of the Riders' Championship by a single point from Ushov, who'd only managed to finish third. And his win was also enough to give Lotto the team standings, with CSC dropping down to third place. Stage 4 was a big day for T-Mobile, with them scoring the first 1-2 finish of the race, and Eddie Mazzoleni picking them up even more points with his 8th place finish, as Daniele Benatti's podium was enough to take him up to third in the standings, with Jimmy Casper falling down to 7th after failing to score since his win on day 2. Looks like the French won't be winning this version of the race either. T-Mobile flew to the top of the team standings, scoring more points in one day than any other team had managed in the entire race so far. And Robbie McEwen was back at the top of the leaderboard on the next stage to solidify his lead, with Benatti and Boonen both overtaking Ushov, knocking him off the podium. And Francisco Ventoso's 7th place finish gave Saunier their first points of the season. Oscar Freire launched his bid for a podium spot with a win on stage 6, moving him within 1 point of Tom Boonen, as Daniele Benatti slipped down to 5th after failing to score any points. And Inaki Asasi scored the first points of the season for Euskaltel, leaving only 3 French teams left without any points. He made it back-to-back points finishes the next day, as Robbie McEwen secured his 3rd victory of the race so far, becoming the first rider to break the 100-point threshold. And Benatti's 2nd place moved him back up the leaderboards and within 4 points of Oscar Freire on the podium. The points were also enough to move his team ahead of Freire's Rabobank, as Lampre and Quickstep moved into the top 3. The next day was a time trial where T-Mobile managed to score points with 4 different riders. Now, some of you may be thinking, hang on, why is Floyd Landis there? Wasn't he disqualified for cheating? Yes, but so was Michael Schumacher in the 1997 F1 season, but he still got to keep the points from the races that he won. It was just his final position that was taken away from him, so it's only fair that I follow the precedent of the rules that we're using for the point system. Of the 4 T-Mobile riders, the best placed among them was Michael Rogers, who moved up to 6th place overall, but the biggest movements were in the team standings, with T-Mobile jumping up to within 3 points of the leaders, with their total of 49 being the most points scored by any team in a single stage during this race. Stage 9 was won by a breakaway, with Silvan Calzati scoring the first points of the race for AG2R, and Benatti managed to take back his place on the podium, and Bernie Eisel's consistent low point finishes were enough to move him up into the top 10. The battle for the final podium spot continued, with 4 teams within just 11 points of each other going into the final sprint finish before the mountains, and that sprint would be won by Oscar Freire as he took his second win of the race, with him and Boonen both gaining points on Benatti, whose lack of points dropped him out of the podium positions and left his team Lampre dropping down to 5th place in the team standings. Stage 11 was once again won by the breakaway, with Juan Mercado gaining the first points of the race for Agritubel. And in the grand scheme of things, there was very little movement in the rider standings, with Eric Zabel being the only notable rider to move up. And after Agritubel's win, Bouygues Telecom are left as the only team in the race with no points so far. The first mountaintop finish for the Tour was won by Denis Menchov, with almost all but 3 riders scoring their first points of the season. Because of this, it was only Menchov and Landis who made any movements in the rider standings. But in the team standings, Menchov took over where Freire had left off, scoring lots of points for Rabobank as they moved up into 2nd place overall. It was back to Freire scoring the points for Rabobank on stage 13, this time from a breakaway, as Popovych took Discovery's first win of the race. Alessandro Balan was the only rider to improve his position in the Riders' Championship. The double points finish from him and Benatti were enough to push Lampre up into the top 3. Stage 14 in real life was one of the most impactful of the entire race, with the half hour that Pereiro gained massively contributing to his overall win. But with this point system, it was much less dramatic, with his 2nd place not even being enough to bring him into the top 20. However, it was enough to bring his team up to 12th in the team standings, only one more 2nd place finish away from being in the top 7. They would not score any of those points on stage 15, however, as Pierrick Rodrigo won, claiming the first points of the race for Bouygues Telecom, meaning finally, after over 2/3 of the race, every team had scored a point. There was once more not much change in the rider standings, but the lack of flat stages was starting to hurt Quick Step and Credit Agricole as they both dropped down the leaderboard. Frank Schleck won on Alpe d'Huez, with his teammate Carlos Sastre also scoring points. This propelled him up into the top 20, with Floyd Landis also moving closer to the top 5. However, it was not such a good day for Tom Boonen, as he crashed out of the race, putting his podium position in danger if Benatti was able to keep scoring. And the double points finishes of T-Mobile and CSC were enough to move them both up into the top 5 with just 5 stages to go. Stage 17 saw Rabobank get their 3rd difference winner of the race. However, the mountains proved to be too much for Daniele Benatti as he withdrew from the race, ending his chances of finishing on the podium. By this point, there had been enough mountain stages for several climbers to make their way up into the top 20, and given CSC and Castepanier the chance to climb higher up the leaderboard. And this would continue on stage 18, with the last summit finish of the race being taken by Floyd Landis, which was enough to move him into the top 5 of the rider standings, with Sastre and Pereiro both also making it into the top 10, and Michael Bugger's 5th place finish was enough for Rabobank to displace Lotto from the top of the team standings for the first time since stage 4. However, neither of those teams would score any points in the next stage, as it was won by Tasato in the breakaway, and Moreni's 2nd place gave him enough points to move from outside of the top 20 into the top 10. However, Oscar Freire ended up withdrawing from the Tour, meaning it was now mathematically impossible for anyone left in the race to catch up with Robbie McEwen with only 2 stages remaining. The team standings, however, were a lot closer, with Tassato's win bringing Quickstep back into the top 5, overtaking T-Mobile. However, T-Mobile would immediately respond, getting another 1-2 finish on the penultimate stage, with Clodin and Honchar both moving up into the top 10, and Floyd Landis taking 4th position. So going into the final day, Rabobank were in the lead with less than 10 points separating the top 3 teams. And on the final day, Robbie McEwen's 2nd place would win the team standings for Lotto, as Ushov won the final stage to add to his win on stage 1. And so Robbie McEwen ended up winning with a massive 60-point lead over Frere, with Tom Boonen rounding out the podium. Floyd Landis was the best placed climber, just beating out Ushov for 4th place. However, he did get caught taking drugs and was disqualified in real life, so we must follow the same procedure here. And in the team standings, Lotto won the title on the final day, with CSC nearly claiming 2nd as well, just missing out by a single point. And if anyone wants to see the full list with every single rider on it, that will be available on my Patreon, link in the description. And if you want to see more of these for the other year's tours, subscribe and leave a like on the video.